My dad blamed me for Mom's death. Since birth, after he lied to his wife about buying my house, I kicked him out and cut him off forever. My life has always been hard from the very beginning. You see, my mom died while giving birth to me in the hospital. After that, I was raised by my dad, who somehow held me, a newborn, responsible for her death. Throughout my entire childhood, not a single day passed without him reminding me, in one harsh way or another, that I was the reason she was no longer alive. He constantly told me that my birth had taken away the person he loved the most, and that he never truly wanted me to begin with. He'd say that since my life had come at such a heavy cost, I had to work hard and be worth it. Otherwise, her death meant nothing. As you can imagine, hearing things like that as a kid was soul-crushing. I was too young to understand the layers of grief, loss, and rage. I needed my mom too, but she was gone, and the only parent I had left treated me like I was the cause of everything wrong. The one who was supposed to protect me, guide me, and comfort me became the person who made me feel like I should have never existed. My dad didn't just act like he didn't want me, he made it painfully clear every chance he got. Growing up in that kind of environment was incredibly hard. I often felt guilty just for existing, for breathing. There were moments when I desperately wanted to talk to him, to tell him how much his words hurt me, how they made me feel like I didn't even belong in my own home. But fear kept me quiet, and the few times I tried to speak up, I was only met with more coldness and rage. The result was a childhood filled with deep loneliness and isolation. While other kids had parents who cheered them on, comforted them, and made them feel safe, I felt like I was walking on broken glass, always afraid to do or say the wrong thing that might set him off again. It wasn't just the absence of love that hurt, it was the constant presence of anger and blame, directed at something I had no control over. The simple fact that I was alive. Still, I tried to understand his pain. I knew losing my mom had broken him and that he never fully recovered. But understanding his grief didn't make it easier to carry the weight of his resentment. I was just a kid trying to feel like I mattered in a world that felt cold and unforgiving. And yet, despite all the pain, deep down, I still longed for his approval, for his love, his recognition. I always hoped that somehow, if I tried hard enough, I could make him proud. I remember the anxious hope I felt every time I brought home a report card filled with good grades. I'd approach him full of excitement, hoping that maybe this time he'd smile, say something kind, just something to show he was proud. But every time it ended the same way. He would barely look at the report card, grunt, and tell me to study harder because it still wasn't enough. He'd say that hundreds of other kids could get grades like mine, so it didn't really matter. Instead of feeling seen or appreciated, I was met with indifference. It was a constant reminder that I still wasn't meeting his expectations. No matter what I did, it never seemed to be enough. And it wasn't just school where I felt his disapproval. Anytime I wanted to do something outside of academics, like join a sports team or hang out with friends, he would shut it down right away. He told me the only thing I needed to focus on was my studies, so I could get out of his house as fast as possible. Those words hit me hard. They made it clear that to him, I wasn't a son, just a burden he couldn't wait to be rid of. My friends would talk about how their parents supported their hobbies, encouraged them to explore, and made their childhood fun. But for me, there was none of that. I was constantly reminded that I was a guest in his house, and if I didn't follow his rules to the letter, I could be thrown out. Even weekends, which should have been a break or a chance to have fun, were no different. Whenever I asked to go out or spend time with my friends, my dad would go off on a rant about how I was wasting his money, even if all I wanted was something simple, like hanging out at a friend's place or going to the park. He'd launch into a full-blown lecture. He'd talk about how hard he was working to pay for my education, and how I had no right to waste time or resources on friendships. It was as if anything that gave me even a little joy or sense of normalcy was automatically labeled as pointless or selfish by him. One of the most painful memories I have is how he reacted to my 15th birthday. Most kids look forward to their birthdays with excitement, planning parties, hanging out with friends. But for me, it was always a day I dreaded. He didn't like me celebrating my birthday at all. But that year, I had a small bit of hope that maybe things would be different. I just wanted to go see a movie and have some pizza with a few friends. When I finally got the courage to ask him for a little money, he exploded. He screamed at me, saying I had no right to celebrate the day because it was also the day my mother had died. He made it clear that my birthday would always be the worst day of the year for him, and that I should never even think about enjoying it. So I didn't. I never celebrated with my friends. As you can imagine, over time, all these repeated experiences made one thing painfully obvious. My dad hated me and didn't want me around. The constant rejection and criticism wore me down. I felt like I was always on edge, trying not to make one wrong move that would trigger his anger. Eventually, I learned to hide my hopes and dreams. I stopped expecting approval or encouragement because I knew it would only end in more disappointment. Instead, I put all my energy into being strong for myself. I focused on getting good grades because the only way out was through. If I wanted to escape that house, I had to earn it. All the studying, determination, and late nights finally paid off. I still remember the moment I got my acceptance letter from a top university. With a full scholarship, it felt like the biggest relief. After everything I had endured, I was finally free. I was getting out of that house, away from my dad's toxic hold, and stepping into a new phase of life, one where I could finally live on my own terms. Leaving home was like having a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. College became a time of discovery, growth, and happiness. I got to live like a normal young adult, doing all the things I had only dreamed about. My dad still tried to control me from a distance, but I stopped listening. I had lived under his thumb long enough. Now, it was my turn to make choices and build the life I wanted. Even with all the new freedom and fun that came with college, I never lost focus. I kept my grades up and stayed determined to make the most of the opportunity I had worked so hard to earn. But I also let myself enjoy life. I went to parties, joined clubs, explored my interests, made new friends, and finally started living the way I had always imagined life could be. It was during this time that I met my girlfriend, Sheila, one of the most unexpected and beautiful things to happen to me in college. From the very beginning, I felt drawn to her. We were incredibly alike, both ambitious, driven, and focused on our careers. But what made our relationship truly special was the deeper connection we shared. Sheila understood me in a way no one else ever had. One of the things I love most about her is how we can sit together for hours without feeling the need to talk. She gives me space to get lost in my thoughts, and that kind of comfort is rare. With Sheila, I never feel like I have to pretend or perform. I can just be myself. We enjoy each other's presence, whether we're talking about our goals or just sitting in silence. She was the first person who truly made me feel like I didn't have to carry the heavy guilt I'd been dragging with me for so many years. She saw straight through all the pain I'd buried. I had lived with pain for so long that I barely noticed it anymore. It had become such a constant part of my life, I didn't even recognize it as abnormal. But Sheila did. She pointed out how incredibly wrong it was for my dad to blame me for my mom's death, and how no child should ever be forced to carry that kind of burden. She was the first person to encourage me to try therapy, something I had never seriously considered before. My dad's voice was so deeply embedded in my mind that I hadn't even realized there might be a way to break free from his influence. Starting therapy turned out to be one of the most life-changing experiences of my life. It wasn't easy, especially at first. Facing the truth of my upbringing, acknowledging the trauma I had endured, and starting to untangle the toxic beliefs I had accepted as normal took an immense amount of courage and effort. But therapy opened my eyes like nothing else ever had. It helped me see just how flawed my dad's perspective was and how much more I deserved. Slowly, I began to understand that I was never responsible for my mom's death, that my dad's anger, grief, and resentment were his burdens to carry, not mine. As I began to heal, I noticed a new feeling rising inside me. Anger. Real, burning anger. After years of trying so hard to please him, to win his approval, to carry the weight he had unfairly placed on me, I was finally letting myself feel the resentment I had buried deep down. I started to see how much of my childhood had been shaped by emotional abuse, and how long I had lived trying to fix something that wasn't my fault. That anger made it nearly impossible to have any meaningful relationship with him during my college years. I barely spoke to him, and when I did, our conversations were tense and clipped. I'd snap at him, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. I had no patience left for his judgment or attempts to control me. There was one day when I finally confronted him. It wasn't planned, it just spilled out in a moment of raw emotion. I told him everything. I laid it all out. The years of blame, the pain his words had caused, how deeply he had scarred my mental health, and how I wasn't going to allow him to continue doing that to me. I told him I was done being his scapegoat. I said I deserved to be treated with respect, and that if he couldn't do that, I would walk away from our relationship for good. For once, he was silent. He didn't apologize, which part of me had hoped he might, but he also didn't argue. He didn't deny a single thing I said. After that, I noticed a slight shift in how he spoke to me. He seemed to be trying, just a little, to be more careful with his words, to speak more gently. It felt like he was making an effort to change, or at least to be less cruel. But even so, our relationship stayed distant. Years of damage couldn't be undone with a few softer words. I appreciated the small change, but I knew it would take far more to truly rebuild what had been broken, if rebuilding it was even possible. Over time, even though my relationship with my dad has remained fractured, the intense guilt and anger I once carried have started to fade. I've accepted that I can't change the past, but I can choose how it affects my future. Sheila's support throughout this process has meant everything to me. Her love, patience, and belief in me helped me see that I am worthy of love, of happiness, and of peace. Not long ago, my dad got married to his girlfriend Day. It was a small, private wedding, and despite everything between us, Sheila and I decided to attend. We wanted to show our support and wish them well as they started this new chapter of their lives. I was genuinely happy for him. A part of me even hoped that marriage might soften him, help him grow, maybe even become a better man. But just a month after the wedding, I got a call from him. He sounded panicked. Apparently, he had made some terrible financial decisions and was now struggling. He admitted he hadn't been able to pay his rent for 6 months and was now facing eviction. He said he hadn't told his wife yet, afraid it would cause a huge argument. Then, without hesitation, he asked if I could pay his rent. The moment he asked, I said no. I had the money, sure, but I didn't want to be used. Not again. Not after everything we'd been through. I wasn't going to let him treat me like his financial backup plan, especially after the years of emotional neglect and pain he had caused me. I've worked incredibly hard to build the life I have now, and I didn't want to open the door for my dad to come to me for money every time things went wrong. But after talking it over with Sheila, guilt began creeping in. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was being too cold, that despite everything, he was still my father, and maybe he genuinely needed help. So I called him back and offered a compromise. I told him I wouldn't pay his rent, but he and Day could stay with me temporarily. I was living alone in a house with more than enough space, and I figured this would give them time to get back on their feet and find a new place. It wasn't an easy decision, given our history, but I felt it was the right thing to do. I made sure to set boundaries. This was a temporary arrangement, and I expected him to actively work toward fixing his situation. He took a few days to think it over, but eventually he called me back and agreed. Within 2 weeks, he and Day moved in, and I set up a guest room for them. That first month was all about adjusting. It had been years since I'd lived with my dad, and we were both completely different people now. I was no longer the teenager forced to bite his tongue and tolerate his cruelty. I was an adult, with my own routines and rules. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for his old habits to return. My dad began nitpicking my lifestyle, how I spent my time, how I maintained the house, even the smallest details about my day-to-day life. It was as if nothing had changed for him. But I had changed. I wasn't that helpless kid anymore. This time, I stood my ground. Anytime he criticized or tried to control me, I firmly told him to stop. I made it clear that he had no right to dictate how I lived, especially while staying under my roof. I wasn't rude, but I was direct. I wasn't going to fall back into that old pattern of tiptoeing around his moods. Of course, his wife Day didn't like this. More than once, she made comments about how I needed to show my father more respect. She'd say things like, "He sacrificed so much for you." I'd just shake my head silently. She didn't know the truth. She didn't know half of what I went through growing up. I did respect my father as much as I could, but I wasn't going to let him bulldoze over my boundaries again. I had spent too much of my life trying to win his approval while sacrificing my own happiness. I wasn't doing that anymore. Still, I didn't think it was my place to expose everything to Day. Whenever she made those remarks, I kept quiet. It wasn't worth the argument. I reminded myself that this living arrangement was temporary, and I still hoped we could make it work without constant conflict. But then one evening, after an exhausting day at work, I came home to a mess. The living room was cluttered, the kitchen piled with dirty dishes, and there sat my dad and Day, lounging on the couch, watching TV like nothing was wrong. I asked him why he hadn't cleaned, since it was clearly his day to take care of the chores, something I had reminded them about more than once. That's when he hit me with that same old condescending tone that used to make my skin crawl. "You're a grown-ass man I raised on my own after your mom died," he said. You should be ashamed of yourself for asking me to do your dirty work. You can wash the dishes yourself." I was furious. I snapped. "You know what's actually embarrassing?" I shot back. "The fact that you're sitting here on my couch, in my house, watching my TV, eating my food, and you have the nerve to bark orders at me? You begged me to let you move in for free. You and your wife haven't lifted a finger to help me since you got here. So here's a thought. If you don't feel like doing the dishes, then pack your bags and get out." My dad just stared at me, completely stunned by the force of my words. There was a heavy silence after my outburst, and for a moment I thought he might actually get up and storm out, but I knew he had nowhere else to go. Without saying another word, I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the kitchen door behind me, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and frustration. The next morning I went downstairs and found myself alone in the kitchen with Day. My dad had probably left early for work. Just as I was about to leave the room, she asked if we could talk. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed to sit and listen. With a serious expression, Day told me how hurt my dad had been after our argument the night before. She said I had no right to speak to him that way, especially considering, in her words, how much money he had spent helping you buy this house. I was stunned. My dad hadn't contributed a single cent to this house. I had worked, saved, and bought it entirely on my own after college. He hadn't helped me financially at all, not since the day I left for school. The idea that he had played a role in purchasing my home was completely false. I asked Day to clarify what she meant, and she explained that my dad told her he had used part of his savings to help me buy the house. That's when it all clicked. I could hardly believe it. This was the story he had been telling her. That he was some kind of generous provider? I almost found it funny. The lie was so bold. Before I could even respond, she pressed on, insisting that I should be grateful for all my dad had done for me. She said that with his financial troubles, it would only be fair for me to repay some of that support by paying them rent, since in her eyes, this house was partially his too. She said it was the least I could do, given the sacrifices he had supposedly made. I looked at her and I just couldn't hold it in. I started laughing. The whole thing was so ridiculous, so far from the truth, that I couldn't take it seriously. When I finally stopped, I told her plainly, I was the sole owner of the house. My dad hadn't given me a dime. The look on her face was unforgettable. Her embarrassment and disbelief were written all over it. She asked if I was being serious, that my dad never helped me buy it, and I explained how he hadn't even been able to pay his own rent, let alone contribute to mine. There was no way he could have helped with this house. After that, she didn't argue much. I think something in her shifted. She must have seen the truth. Later that same day, she packed up her things and left. I didn't stop her. It wasn't my place to interfere. That evening, when my dad got home and saw she was gone, he called her immediately. Once he found out I had told her the truth about the house, he was furious. He accused me of ruining everything, said I had embarrassed him, and deliberately made his wife uncomfortable. According to him, I should have just kept quiet and let her believe the lie. He told me I had made him feel small and inadequate, like he was less of a man because he couldn't afford his own place. I was beyond frustrated. I reminded him that I had taken him in out of kindness, that I was offering him a roof over his head, and instead of showing gratitude, he was blaming me for his broken lies. Once again, he had twisted the situation to make me the villain. It felt like I was right back in my childhood, where no matter what I did, I was always the one at fault. He wouldn't listen. He refused to acknowledge my side and kept insisting that I call Dei and apologize, telling her that I'd made a mistake and that he had helped with the house after all. In other words, he wanted me to lie, to cover for him, to make his story believable. But I was done with the lies. I told him flat out that I wasn't going to lie to his wife for him. I was mentally and emotionally drained from the constant manipulation and guilt-tripping. I had reached my breaking point. I finally told him I couldn't take it anymore, that having him in my home was draining my mental health. I asked him to pack his things and leave by the next day. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I knew it had to be done. I needed boundaries. For my peace. For my future. He insisted he had nowhere else to go and begged for more time. But in that moment I just couldn't bring myself to care. I was done with the excuses. He moved out the very next morning. Since then, my dad has been calling and messaging me constantly, complaining that I've ruined his life and destroyed his marriage. He says Day refuses to speak to him and blames me for how things turned out. According to him, a good son would never have kicked his own father out. But I don't regret it. Many of you suggested I contact Day and tell her the truth about my childhood, since she might not know the real version of who my father is. Until now, I've tried to stay out of his personal life, but I agree that she deserves to know. He's clearly lied to her before, and there's no telling what else he might have twisted. So I've decided to reach out and have a one-on-one conversation with her. It's been a week since my last post, and I finally had the chance to sit down and talk with Day. As I suspected, she had no idea about the kind of childhood I had. I shared how my father blamed me for my mother's death, the emotional abuse I endured, and how it all affected me growing up. She seemed genuinely shocked. She admitted my dad had painted a completely different picture, one where he was a struggling single father who had sacrificed everything for his son. I shook my head in disbelief. I told her how I worked relentlessly throughout college, landed a high-paying job on my own merit, and saved for years to buy my house, without a single dime from my father. I explained that's why I felt uncomfortable when he tried to control things in my home, because I was never even allowed to be myself in his. Day understood my pain. Then she told me something I hadn't known. My dad had lost all his money to gambling. She hadn't told me earlier because he was too ashamed to admit it. When he first suggested moving in with me, she had actually refused. She wasn't comfortable staying in my house. That's why, according to her, he lied and claimed he'd helped pay for it, so she wouldn't feel guilty about accepting the offer. Once she learned from me that he had fabricated the entire story to manipulate her, she was devastated. She told me how embarrassed she felt for demanding rent that day. I reassured her it wasn't her fault. The blame lay entirely on my dad for deceiving her. As we said goodbye, she mentioned needing time away from him to reevaluate their relationship. I could tell our conversation had made a real impact on her. The last time we spoke, he tried once again to pin all the blame on me, but this time, I didn't even argue. I just blocked him. Since then, I've felt lighter. The weight of his constant guilt, shame, and manipulation is gone. I feel clearer, freer, like I finally got my life back. Sheila has been amazing through all of this. She supported me every step of the way, offering comfort, listening when I needed to vent, and encouraging me to keep moving forward. I'm beyond grateful to have her by my side. Now, with my dad out of the picture, and Sheila beside me, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life, pursuing my goals, and finally embracing the happiness and stability I've worked so hard for.